My name is Michael Gerhardt. I'm managing the safety program section of the agency, which is responsible for the European Plan for Aviation Safety. In this part, I would like to make you familiar with the European Plan for Aviation Safety, EPAS. I would like to show you what it is about, using the example of the current EPAS edition, EPAS 2021, but also giving you an idea of how EPAS edition 2022 will look like. I would also like to inform you at the end briefly about a process which we are currently revisiting, a process implementing the EPAS, namely the rulemaking process. But let's get started with the EPAS. EPAS, if you are familiar with the ICAO system of managing safety and planning safety, is understood in the context of the Global Aviation Safety Plan, the GASP in ICAO. The GASP, laying out the global strategy, provides the framework for the implementation of regional and national aviation safety plans. And in that context, EPAS constitutes the regional aviation safety plan for the EASA member states. Since 2018, the EPAS is also embedded in our basic regulation. Article 6 of that regulation lays the basis on how we conduct the EPAS. EPAS is setting out the strategic priorities and strategic enablers. It provides the assessment of the main risks affecting the European aviation safety system and provides the necessary mitigation actions for those risks, for example, rulemaking tasks. EPAS, according to this Article 6, is updated on an annual basis. The 2021 edition is the third edition of the EPAS, and you find all that information laid out in 3 volumes. In volume 1, you find an introduction and the description of the strategy. In volume 2, you will see all the EPAS actions that we have identified to mitigate the safety risks. Currently, approximately 170 actions. And in volume 3, there are the safety risk portfolios which identify the key risks and the underlying safety issues and show you the assessment that leads to the identification of the EPAS actions. On all of these 3 volumes, I will show you a little bit of contents of what is in there, starting with volume 1. In volume 1, you predominantly will find the strategic priorities. They are unchanged compared to the 2019 and 2020 edition, and they are structured according to systemic safety issues, operational safety issues, safe integration and new technologies and concepts, and also environment, sustainable aviation. I will not go through the complete list in detail, but I highlighted here those strategic priorities which are relevant for certification and design. I give you a couple of seconds to have a look. Just to make a link, under the systemic safety priorities, the last item listed there, civil-military cooperation, will be subject to a specific presentation in the context of this workshop. One aspect that is new since 2021 in Volume 1 is the description of the operational context. This is of particular interest and describes the context in which you can see all the EPAS actions that we have identified to mitigate the safety risks and the context in which they are deployed. So this operational context provides you information on the European aviation system in terms of its size, nature and complexity. It also gives you an idea about the number of aviation organizations, personnel and products which are under these actions. And looking into the COVID situation, it also gives you an initial assessment of the impacts that COVID-19 had per aviation domain. In Volume 2, you will find the actions to mitigate safety risks. Not going into the details of these slides, but I would like to give you some idea of how these actions look like and how they are structured. Starting on the right bottom side, the EPAS actions per type. I mentioned before we have approximately 170 actions, and they are structured into rulemaking actions, safety promotion actions, research actions, member state tasks, and evaluation actions. And half of that, a bit more than half of that, is related to rulemaking, our rulemaking actions. On the right-hand side, on the upper part, you see that we structured the information per domain. The main information that I would like to show here is that the upper bar is the domain related to design and production. So here you'll find a lot of actions related to certification and design. But not all of them are in that domain. You will also see a chapter on rotorcraft. You will also see a chapter on general aviation. So the actions related to design and certification are spread over some of these domains. On the left-hand side, there are a couple of examples of main actions that were introduced in the 2021 edition of the EPAS. Some of them, few of them, are also related to initial airworthiness, not necessarily related directly to certification. At least you will not find them in the domain in the chapter on certification, on design and production. And these are these two new actions that I highlighted. In particular, the second one related to environment. Here also you will have a specific presentation from my colleague on how this is going to be implemented. On the next 4 slides, I would like to give you an overview, not in detail, but just to show you what are the actions that you do find here on the example in Chapter 9 on design and production. You will see that we didn't introduce any new actions in 2021 in this chapter. And you will see that the status that we planned for a number of other actions related to design and production rulemaking. Here, this is the status of our planning beginning of the year when we published the EPAS edition in January. My colleague Rodrigo Priego will update you later on the current status, which of these deliverables have already been published, where the publications are upcoming. So this here is the status beginning of January, what we had in our plan. You see a number of notice of proposed amendments, proposals for changes to rules on this slide and on this slide here. We planned this year to publish 2 opinions with proposals of regulation changes to the European Commission. And we planned these 5 decisions predominantly to amend certification specifications. So just to give you an overview of how the actions in Chapter 9, as an example, are structured. In Volume 3, you find the safety risk portfolios. These are essential background information for the actions that you have just seen in Volume 2. The safety portfolios are a list of safety issues that have been identified to be mitigated, and we structured them in accordance of portfolios of domains. Some of them you see listed here on that slide. We have a safety portfolio on aerodrome and ground handling, ATM, commercial air transport for aeroplanes, human factors, and non-commercial operations for small aeroplanes. We also work on other safety risk portfolios, for example, rotorcraft, which is about to be completed and which you can expect to see in the next edition of the EPAS. Also, we had developed a dedicated COVID-19 safety risk portfolio. In these safety risk portfolios, you'll see the outcome of our assessment of safety issues, of safety risks, and how they are prioritized by us. And the prioritization at the end of the assessment is in 3 categories. We conclude to either further assess the issues, that means we need to have further analysis, or we decide to mitigate, meaning to take action, or we decide to monitor the issue further. And when we are in the middle category, the mitigation, that means that we are identifying actions to mitigate, and these are then the safety actions, the mitigation actions that you do find in Volume 2 of the EPAS, namely rulemaking tasks, safety promotion tasks, member state tasks, or research projects. So this is how Volume 3 and Volume 2 are intrinsically linked. So this is an overview of the current EPAS edition. Beginning of next year, in January, we will publish the next edition, the 11th edition of the EPAS, EPAS 2022-2026. And this edition is currently being finalized. We plan to present it to our management board for endorsement in December, and then mid-January to publish it on our website. At the moment, we just concluded the consultation of the draft EPAS with our advisory bodies that took place in July and August. We are at the very end of reviewing the comments and considering the comments to see whether they necessitate any changes to the EPAS. And we will review the last time and update the timelines of the EPAS actions, and that will happen in the first 2 weeks of November, where we will also inform again the advisory bodies on the planned timelines. And based on that information, then you will see the next edition of EPAS on our website mid-January. During the consultation with the advisory bodies, we received 388 comments. Compared to the previous consultation, 2019, it's a bit less. Most comments were related to the concept and the organization of the EPAS, to the strategic part. There are also comments related to consistency. There are proposals to amend the description of certain actions, and there are also proposals for including new actions in the EPAS. Sorry. Looking at these initial feedbacks, just to give you some examples with relevance for certification and design organizations, maybe some general information, comments related to the EPAS structure, the contents, and the planning cycle. For example, there are proposals to streamline the information in Volume 1, so the strategic part, to review the structure of it, in particular to better clarify certain information, especially when it comes to the description of drones, new air mobility, and new types of propulsion for better clarity. Comments related to the processing and programming, for example, were that we should ensure better alignment with the ICAO standards and recommended practices and their entry into force, and also some comments to break down some complex regular update rulemaking tasks into specific dedicated items. In relation to initial airworthiness, we overall, out of these 388 comments, received 12 comments directly affecting initial airworthiness, and 3 of them were more of conceptual nature and requests to change the scope of some actions. 9 of these 12 comments were more asking for clarification or pointed out inconsistency in what we had prepared in the draft. The main 3 comments were related to rulemaking task 709, prevention of catastrophic accident due to rotorcraft hoist issues. Here, the commentator ask us to better clarify how and which standard we would like to consider when developing CS-ETSO and how that is related to the industry consensus standards developed. And then there were two comments in relation to research tasks, the sandwich structure composite, where there is a proposal to redraft the scoping, and for air data enhanced fault detection and diagnosis, we are still in discussion how to handle that comment. The request was to involve also the manufacturing industry, and we are currently discussing that, and we will communicate that together with our response to all the comments that we received on the EPAS later this year. So what is new in this 2022 edition compared to what I just showed you for the 2021 edition? In Volume 1, we started to review the strategic priorities and the enablers. It's not yet a fundamental review. We are still planning to do that in the coming years. But what we already did for this edition is that we considered the COVID safe return to operation, a very important aspect for our strategy. We considered the Commission's sustainability and smart mobility strategy. We considered integrated approach to risk management because we saw that the threats related to security and cybersecurity are increasing. And we considered some outcome of the research and innovation strategy, namely related to new technologies and operating concepts. I gave you some examples here: urban air mobility, high altitude operations, artificial intelligence, virtual certification, and reduced crew operations. The two last ones are probably the ones which are of most relevance for this audience. In Volume 2, the actions, we have included very few, approximately 22 new actions related to safety risk management, including, again, looking at the COVID-19 risk portfolio. We started new actions transposing ICAO standards and recommended practices that were new on the ICAO side. And from some of the previous EPAS actions, when we evaluated existing regulations and we looked at the recommendations coming out of these evaluations, and that triggered also some new rulemaking actions. In addition, you will notice some changes in timelines of existing actions. We also reviewed the priority ranking on the basis of our current strategic priorities, especially on Volume 1, and that changed some of the timelines that we had planned in the past. We also revisited our resource allocations, and checked whether we do have the resources available for completing the actions as planned with the timelines before. So also here, there may have been or there will be some changes to timelines. And the last point, we also started a review of the EASA rulemaking process. And that will certainly also lead to changes into some timelines of existing rulemaking actions, some of which you will also see already embedded in Volume 2 of the new EPAS edition. And this actually brings me to my last point. I wanted to inform you about this new process on how we are implementing the EPAS, namely the rulemaking actions of the EPAS, and what we have in mind when we talk about the review of that rulemaking process. The reason for that is that the current edition, the current version of our rulemaking process, which is a management board decision, dates back to 2015. In 2018, our basic regulation was amended. So we need to revisit some of the parts of the rulemaking process to bring it in line and make it consistent with the recent basic regulation. In particular, as I mentioned at the beginning, in the 2018 basic regulation, the link to EPAS was introduced. And that so far is not reflected in the management board decision of 2015. Also, in the meantime, the Commission had amended and improved its better regulation agenda. Also that we want to reflect. And finally, we did an evaluation of how effective and efficient the last changes of the Management Board decision back in 2015 were, and we concluded that we couldn't draw upon the full potential, the full intent of what we wanted to achieve with the latest amendment. So we are seeking for more efficient and more effective processes to conduct rulemaking actions. And that will mean what we have in mind is, instead of having currently 3 distinct processes to develop rules, a standard procedure and 2 exceptional procedures under certain conditions, we want to go back to 1 lean procedure, which should allow us to reduce the lead time in some steps of conducting the rulemaking task. One important aspect is that we want to gain time before we start a rulemaking task. The preparation of it is currently quite time-consuming. And we also want to look at certain consultation periods and see how to effectively organize these consultation periods instead of going always towards the same standard consultation period. This is closely linked to the next aspect. We want to look at the consultation and make it more effective. Again, not as a standard, go always back to the same audience, but we want to see what are the interested parties, who are the affected stakeholders, and whom do we need to consult to get the best output from that consultation for the purpose of making the best rule that we can make. To that end, we propose to introduce on a number of procedural steps a system of what we call flexible toolbox. So depending on the needs, depending on the risk that we want to mitigate, depending on the criticality of the issue, that we have different tools in our toolbox to run an effective and efficient process. And an important part of all of that is that any of our rules is based on a strong and iterative impact assessment. We also want to clarify the different steps and the different elements of impact assessments and make that much clearer and much more logic in the way how the process is described. In the end, that should enable us to focus the procedure so that we can really work on strategic and priority-driven rulemaking developments. We want to achieve that we have a drafting of simple, state-of-the-art rules in the best possible way. And we want to ensure that we very well explain and justify the rules, why they are needed and why we drafted that, the way how we drafted them. We prepared a proposal to amend this Management Board decision to our Management Board in June. And the Management Board agreed to work on that revision. So we are currently doing that. We are in a process of very soon consulting the member state and the stakeholders advisory bodies. And by the end of the year, in December, we want to present our first ideas, the first draft, back to the Management Board. For you, the audience here, what is important is I recommend that you carefully monitor that development, because for you, that procedure, that change in procedure may also mean a different way of being engaged in our rulemaking, the possibility to consult and to comment on our proposals. So please carefully monitor the development so that in the end you have a chance to best involve yourself in the way how we develop our regulatory material so that your voice is heard and can be considered by the agency when we conduct these sort of actions. Thank you very much. I hope I could give you a good insight into EPAS, our European Plan for Aviation Safety, its contents and its next developments. Don't hesitate asking any questions you may have directly on the website, and we will endeavor to answer all of them as soon as possible. Thank you very much.